This is a production of Cornell University.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe, for the introduction. Thanks to you all for being here today, and to everyone there on Zoom. And so my talk today, focusing on soil health and climate resiliency, bringing together the science and the stakeholders. I really hope that the theme and the words that are within this title that you see carry over throughout my entire presentation today. I will warn you, this won't be a technical talk, so I'm not presenting a lot of results and a lot of data, but it's more of a background really about myself, the work I've been, let's try this again, sorry. Okay, there we go, thanks for that. And so really because I've been at Cornell for 2 years now, I haven't given a seminar in the department yet. And while I know many of you in this room, there are also a lot of people I don't know. So telling you a little bit about where I come from and the work I'm undertaking to see, potentially there might be opportunities to collaborate at some point. And also because I really want to start with my journey through research and extension, because I know there's also a lot of graduate students here in the room, and I get stopped often in the hallway, asking how did I get into the role I am today? How did I start working in extension? A lot of people conducting agricultural research are interested in this field. And so I really wanted to provide a brief overview of my journey within this space, because I really found it valuable when I was a graduate student, learning about how people moved into the positions they did and decided to take different pathways with their degree. And then I'm going to talk about very briefly at a high level some of the current focus areas of my applied research and extension program that I've been involved with here at Cornell, focusing on perennial fruit systems, mainly orchards, as well as biochar. And then I'm going to quickly provide an update of the New York State Climate Impacts Assessment, with which my colleague Allison Kachrakan last month mentioned the work that we were doing on that, but now it's officially been published, so I want to just provide an update of that. And then really some future efforts and my ideas moving forward in bringing soil health, biochar, circularity into applied research and extension program. So starting from real background about myself, I'm a native of New York. Jokes about Long Island. I grew up on Long Island. It is a very different part of New York State than this part of New York. If folks have not been down to Long Island, I would encourage you to travel down there, and I think you will see for yourself. It's quite a different landscape, urban rural divide, and from an agricultural perspective, it's very different as well. But growing up, I spent a lot of time traveling, lived in other places, and I decided to stay close to home. And I really had a lot of interests growing up in the natural world, in environmental science as a whole. And while I was studying at Stony Brook University, I decided to double major with anthropology. And this allowed me to really connect my interests in both the natural sciences and the social sciences. Basically, human environment interactions, the fact that humans impact their environments and the environment impacts humans as well. And so throughout my time as an undergraduate, and I had an opportunity to do a number of study abroads. And one of those, I spent 3.5 months in northern Kenya, in a very remote part of northern Kenya, pretty much on the border with Ethiopia. That's a very dry land environment. And desertification is becoming a huge problem in this part of the world. Yet people live there. People are surviving in this environment largely as pastoralists. And so they rely on animals for their wealth and for their livelihood. But climate change is changing things, right? It's changing everything here within the US, other parts of the world. And the main trends, particularly across Africa and other places, are it's getting warmer, right? And places are getting drier. And we're getting a lot more variability within climate. And so the people there are learning to adapt. And these are photos from over 10 years ago when I was there. But areas of the world where people were predominantly pastoralists, so nomadic pastoralists, not sedentary in one area, they're learning to grow crops and supplement their livelihood and adapt to the environment, and grow some food to supplement their diet. And this experience being in this part of the world really solidified my interest in humans, or let's say people and their environment and how they interact. I had an opportunity when I finished my undergraduate studies to go to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland and pursue my master's degree. And I conducted my master's thesis work in conjunction with a professor at the UK Biochar Research Centre, which is based at the University of Edinburgh. And I completed my master's work on the potential of biochar produced from Micornia crespis and Prosopis juliflora to enhance soil water holding capacity of dryland soils. And my motivation behind this work was really thinking about utilizing two invasive species, how they can be utilized well, they're a renewable source, they're a nuisance for people, and they're a continuous feedstock for the production of a material like biochar. And is everyone in this room, before I get too far ahead of myself, because I'm going to say biochar many times, and it's an area I'm very familiar with, but does everyone know what biochar is in this room? Have they heard of it? I hope so. Yes? Okay, cool. Getting a lot of head nods, great. And so this really allowed me to think about, or take the soil amendment and think about within this dry land context, how we can increase soil water retention, soil moisture in very dry land systems. And I moved beyond my master's and had an opportunity to continue my work in biochar, and specifically its relation with soil water and crop yields, right? Because the agricultural component. But I went on to pursue my PhD, and that was titled Scaling Understanding of Biochar Aging Impacts on Soil Water and Crop Yields. And that work, I added this component around aging or weathering of biochar, because we really need to understand how biochars, any organic matter, changes over time, right? The chemical, physical, biological properties of it change. And so what are some of these mechanisms that are potentially impacting soil water, crop yield impacts in agronomic systems, so we can better predict long-term sustainability? And so thinking about the Terra Preta de Indio soils, where our idea of biochar came about, what were the properties of those materials that kind of are leading to the impacts we're seeing today with these more freshly produced biochars that we're producing in many different methods? And the approach I took to understanding biochar aging and its impacts on soil water and crop yields was an integrated approach across scales. So I had studies from the laboratory to the modeling scale. And I'm not going to expand on these in much detail at all, and I'm going to summarize 4.5 years of my life in 2 slides. But the unifying theme within all my PhD work was, how does biochar weathering impact soil water? And what are the potentials for it to improve agroecosystem sustainability? So I'm just going to highlight 2 big picture findings from my PhD work, and that fresh and aged biochars impact soil water relations differently. These impacts are highly variable and differ depending upon the soil type and method of application, and obviously application rates. I used a cropping systems model during my PhD work called APSIM, the Agricultural Production System Simulator, which is a cropping systems model out of Australia. And within this, I was looking at, within the context of a conventional Midwestern continuous corn soybean system, can the potential negative impacts of corn stover residue removal, which are going to bioenergy production in the US Midwest, can any of the negative impacts on soil quality parameters which are occurring through residue removal be offset by biochar applications? And so this is just an example here of soil organic carbon within a continuous corn system at 3 different corn stover residue removal rates for a biochar that has a high fixed carbon content and a low fixed carbon content at different rates of biochar application and fertilizer. And the other component of this work that we did is over a 32-year simulation period for continuous corn system. evaluating the net private benefits, so the benefits provided solely to a farmer, and the net public benefits for these same biochar application rates. And this work really found that biochar application rates are economically viable when coupled with other more sustainable management practices within a conventional Midwestern system. And biochar applications can increase soil organic carbon levels, decrease nitrate leaching without having a negative impact on corn yields. And the main public benefits provided by biochar application rates come from its ability to reduce carbon dioxide emissions within an agricultural setting. And this work has been really great, and it was done in collaboration with an ag economist, Wendong Zhang, who is now a faculty member here in the Dyson School at Cornell. So he jumped ship from Iowa State as well, came to Cornell. And so hopefully we'll have some future collaborations with him. So during my entire time as a graduate student and a student in general throughout my life, I had a lot of opportunities to engage with stakeholders at all different levels, whether it be high school students, colleagues, in this picture, political representatives visiting from Washington, D.C., but opportunities to engage with folks. And what I realized is that agricultural extension allowed me to take the scientific information and all the research findings I was gathering and share it in a way that non-scientists can understand, right? The general public. And these people are then able to actually implement some type of change. So it's really taking that science that I know, our research and technical expertise, and sharing them with stakeholders, whoever they are. So 3 days before I defended my PhD, I interviewed for a position with Cornell Cooperative Extension back on Long Island. After I defended my PhD, the next day I got a call, offered that position. And so I ended up coming back to New York. I never thought when I got involved in agriculture, actually, because the New York I knew was Long Island for the most part. I never thought I'd be coming back to New York, and particularly to Long Island. But I had a really great opportunity to jump into an agricultural extension position, conduct applied research in an area in a county that I knew very well. So I was really excited about that. And for people who are not familiar with Cornell Cooperative Extension, hopefully everyone is, I'm not going to elaborate, but down on Long Island, Cornell Cooperative Extension operates a little bit differently than the rest of the state because of how isolated Long Island is, and it has a really close connection, interlinked with the Ag Experiment Station located down on Long Island as part of Cornell University, the Long Island Horticulture Research and Extension Center. And so a little bit more about Long Island is that there are 3 million people between Nassau and Suffolk County, so it's very densely populated. They're very urban landscapes as you get closer to New York City and the 5 boroughs, but then very rural landscapes as well. Most importantly, there's a sole source aquifer under Long Island, so the drinking water for 3 million people is right beneath their feet. The issues are soils are much sandier on Long Island, and a lot of the work that's come out of our research group, and Joseph in particular, has shown this production environment different. So sandier soils, low organic matter, and the issues have been, there's been a lot of nitrate leaching, a lot of issues with nitrogen in the drinking water and pesticide contamination, particularly through a lot of potato production that has occurred over on Long Island for long periods of time. So I'm just showing in these photos here some of the diversity of Long Island agriculture, and that's the beauty of it. It's incredibly diverse, but I'm really showing these photos more to show you the soils, right? This is a potato field, nursery crop production. So ornamentals and the horticulture production is #1 on Long Island in terms of New York State agriculture production. But the opportunity I had within Cooperative Extension was to lead the agricultural stewardship program and to provide soil expertise. So given all the nitrate leaching and pesticide contamination in the sandier soils, there was no one on Long Island until I moved there that had a soils background. Entomologists, plant pathologists, vegetable specialists, nursery specialists, but there was no one with really a fundamental or research soils background. So I was really able to offer an expertise that was a gap down there. And I had an incredible time working with a number of excellent collaborators, many of who you might know or have worked with at some point. But these are just images from a number of different projects that I was involved with while on Long Island. Most obviously, they're all, well, 3 are related really to vegetables, but soils were really the unifying theme to be able to collaborate with all these other people on Long Island and work across so many different cropping systems, everything from vineyards to orchards to vegetables and pastures. But some of these projects I worked on: reduced tillage, controlled release nitrogen fertilizer, soil amendments, and cover crops. And the idea in all of these was to reduce nitrogen leaching and pesticide runoff from farmland within Suffolk County. So I'm just going to highlight 2 projects that I was involved with while on Long Island that really relate to the work I'm doing now here at Cornell. And this is looking at wood chips in orchards. So this was an on-farm trial we did with a grower on the East End. We started this trial after I had learned of a trial that Dr. Greg Peck here at Cornell was doing, or a graduate student was doing in the Cornell research orchards, that was showing effectiveness in weed suppression when wood chips were applied. And also there was no harm to the trees, and there was no evidence of rodent damage as well on the trees, or anything that could really be detrimental to the growth of the trees. And on Long Island, which is very different compared to other parts of New York State, and particularly the fruit growing regions, is that because of a lot of the urban and suburban landscape, there are a lot of arborists and landscapes. There's an abundance and an excess of organic materials, and in this case, free wood chips. So there's a large tipping fee for arborists and landscapers to get rid of wood chips when they take down a tree on a home or whatever it may be. And so farmers often take in this organic material. And in this case, this farmer had a lot of wood chips. And they were also looking for ways to reduce their herbicide applications. And so we started this on-farm trial. And you can see just from this one picture here even that how high the weed pressure, the weed seed bank on this farmer's orchard if he did not apply a herbicide, compared to having 1 6-inch application of wood chips. So over the course of just a 2-year study, we saw really great benefits from wood chips being applied within this system. And this work is published in the Fruit Quarterly, fall 2022, if you do want to read it further. Another 3-year trial I was involved with on Long Island was biochar, and this was really carrying over all the work I had done throughout my graduate studies. But this was looking at the impacts of biochar on nutrient retention and availability, soil, water, and obviously crop impacts in nursery production. So I was able to collaborate with my colleague Mina Facira with some funding from SARE to conduct 5 on-farm research trials. I want to show the beginning of a quick video that we created in collaboration with American Farmland Trust, who is a partner on several projects when I was down on Long Island, to really increase the adoption of soil health practices among vegetable farmers down on Long Island. I'm kind of embarrassed by it because it was very early on in my extension career, and there's things I've said that I probably wouldn't say again, or I would say differently. But I'm gonna just play the very beginning of it because I really think it summarizes a lot of the work that I did while I was down on Long Island.
Long Island was always potatoes. And I think that's been our biggest problem here on Long Island. We did something one way for so long. I know we got to work on it really, really hard. Otherwise, there's no future for the farm or the soil.
We've been working directly with American Farmland Trust this year on a Soil Health Champions project. We've worked with 5 vegetable farmers to try and get these vegetable farmers to adopt something new that will help improve soil health on their farm.
American Farmland Trust's main mission is to protect farmland. We also work with improving soil, minimizing impact to water quality.
We're starting to promote more soil health practices and working with some of our partner organizations like Cornell University and Peconic Land Trust. Some examples of more soil health practices are getting farmers to use cover crops, establishing crop rotations instead of just year after year, planting the same crop on the same piece of land. Can we rotate the crops that are on that land? We're trying to work directly with the farmers through on-farm demonstrations and research trials to show them that it can be beneficial to adopt more reduced tillage or no-till or using cover crops.
Well, that's a good breaking point. I provided the link there if you want to watch the rest of the video. It's only 3 minutes, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to show more. But I really like that video because I think it shows some really nice footage of Long Island agriculture, and it really just ties in nicely a lot of the work I did. So another thing that that was an initiative that in collaboration with our local soil and water conservation district that we started a soil health testing program which offered soil health testing free of charge to farmers within Suffolk County, with the idea of breaking down the economic barriers to obtaining like the CASH test, the Cornell Comprehensive Assessment of Soil Health, which is typically a little bit more expensive than a common nutrient test farmers are used to. But our idea as well through this partnership was to start evaluating what was the current status of soil health within Suffolk County, and to obviously monitor over time, but also use it as a point to educate farmers about soil health and their practices. So over a 4-year period, we collected 180 samples on 75 farms. And I was really excited about this work. And what was even better, that it fostered a great collaboration with Harold Van Ness and Joseph M. Silly, and offered me an opportunity to come to Cornell just over 2 years ago now, and really take the next step in providing more soil health education and outreach to farmers across New York State. And so all that work that I started on Long Island led to the first regional characterization in this larger report and the status of soil health on Long Island farms. We utilized our database and brought in over 300 samples from Long Island. And this is just a 12-page report that's available on our website, but is a really great document that's highlighting the distinct production environment down on Long Island compared to the rest of the state. So now I'm going to take a shift and focus on the past 2 years while I've been at Cornell, and a couple of the research areas that I've been involved in, have a lot of interest in. And so it's going to focus on soil health in orchards, and then biochar, focusing on applied research and extension. I think everyone knows we have one of the most well-known biochar scientists in the world right here at Cornell, and it's been wonderful to have opportunities to collaborate with him, Johannes Lehmann, and be able to extend a lot more of this work to the farming community across the state and elsewhere. So why do we care about soil health in orchards? A lot of soil health work has been done in annual cropping systems. We think about continuous corn, or our silage corn systems, our field crops, or high disturbance vegetables, but not orchards, although there have been a lot of people doing work in this area. The first summer I was here at Cornell, I was out at a field day with orchard growers in the Lake Ontario fruit region. There were about 175 farmers there. And you can see all of them are standing there. I was doing a series of soil health demonstrations and a short presentation, except there was one grower standing about 2 feet behind me over my shoulder. And obviously I'm trying to hide their identity. But shortly after I finished my presentation, that individual came and stood right in front of the table and said, "Why do I care about soil health in the orchard? There are corn growers down the road that are tilling, spraying tons of herbicides, And why aren't we thinking about soil health on their farms, right? But we are, right? There's a lot of work going on there. And this individual was pointing to the fact that they have permanent crop in the ground. They have a permanent grass strip in between their rows, right? But we know there's many reasons why we should be caring about soil health, even in the orchard, right? These are some of them. And a very well-known researcher out in Washington State, I think, brought this together in some work that they've been doing out there, that soil health is connected to yield and fruit quality, including challenges such as bitter plit, replant disease, soil-borne diseases, compaction, and water management. So there's a whole host of different processes and functions that soil health is impacting, right? But also what I said to this grower, and Joseph showed this work in his presentation a couple weeks ago, that mixed vegetables and pastures are maintaining the highest levels of soil organic matter. But as a perennial system, why are orchards so low? And someone did ask this question to Joseph, right, at the end of his presentation. So clearly there are opportunities for even perennial fruit growers to improve soil health within their systems. And the reason for this is largely attributed, it's an herbicide strip, right? Multiple times a year, they're spraying. There's no organic matter additions to this part of the orchard, and we're collecting samples from there. And if you can see, it's hard to see with the lighting, but there's not much life, there's not much moisture in this soil. And so something I've been involved with and really taking the lead on while here at Cornell is bringing together people from across New York State who are working within the orchard soil health space or are interested in soil health and work with perennial crops. These are a number of extension educators in the different apple production regions of the state, as well as several faculty members. These are our driving research questions as a team. And it's really, what is the status of soil health in orchards in New York State? How does soil health differ in perennial systems versus annual systems? What are some of the indicators we can use from a soil health test to predict yield and fruit quality? And what are management opportunities for growers? And so for the past 3 years, we've been collecting samples across the 5 major apple growing regions of New York State. And we've collected nearly 100 samples on almost 40 farms so far, and we are expanding this work. Our approach within this, this work as a team has been paired sampling. So in a site where all variables are equal, the soil type, the variety, the rootstock, the age of the tree, their management practices as a grower are all the same, but for some reason, and hopefully even in the back you can see, there are clear differences in the growth of these trees between what we're saying, low productivity and high productivity. And so orchard growers, if you're not familiar with this, this production system, typically take foliar nutrient samples to guide some fertilizer applications to their trees. But if we look at a foliar nutrient test from this grower, and I just took one of our farms from the Lake Ontario region, that everything's the same, right? Everything looks pretty much equal between our low and high productivity trees. But then when we look and we bring in some of the results of soil health testing and the indicators, there are differences. So really, are we missing something by not collecting soil health information within perennial cropping systems? So that is really driving some of our work and many of our research questions. And so there's a lot of future work in this area that hopefully with some additional funding, we'll be able to expand our database of orchard samples. There are growers really interested in improving soil organic matter levels before reestablishing new orchard plantings, for example. Can we put some economics to soil health within orchard settings? Developing a minimum data set of soil health indicators for New York State orchard growers, and then expanding beyond perennial, beyond just orchards to other perennial fruit crops. And so in about June 2023, myself and another colleague, we started a program work team through Cornell Cooperative Extension called Soil Health and Perennial Fruit Systems. And this was a way to coordinate and collaborate with folks interested in working within this space across the state. It has been really great to be able to facilitate research ideas and to dive a little bit deeper into this topic. So now I'm going to go into the black box of biochar. So we move from orchards to biochar. And obviously this is something I've been really passionate about for over a decade now and have a lot of interest in. And so we have a ton of research that has been done in biochar over a little more than a decade. So in just over the last 10 years, there have been over 32,000 publications that have referenced biochar or have some relation to biochar. And a lot of people will show this figure from Gallardi to make the same point that I did. And when it comes to agriculture and agronomic performance, there's already been a systematic review of 26 meta-analysis on agricultural topics related to biochar. So we have a ton of scientific information. There have been a ton of research. Yet there's the widespread adoption within agriculture and by farmers has lagged. And I'm not sure if folks have seen this curve before, but it's something used to explain the adoption of a new technology, the technology adoption life cycle curve that basically shows there's some type of peak of inflated expectations when a new technology is provided, the trough of disillusionment, and then we kind of over time reach some type of plateau when it comes to technology adoption. And I think it's a really great way of thinking about how biochar has, or kind of the biochar industry, or what has happened in the biochar industry over the last decade. There was a real craze about it about 10 to 15 years ago. And then because we didn't have enough of an understanding, it kind of fell off. And we've reached the point where we're starting to reach this plateau where there are adopters. However, a lot of barriers to adoption have been identified when it comes to using biochar in agricultural settings. And when I look at all of these, and within my work directly with being involved in the biochar industry and working with farmers in this area, is that there hasn't been much practical information about taking that science and putting it in a way that farmers understand. So creating materials that farmers, technical service providers, and other stakeholders within agriculture can understand has really been critical to disseminating all that scientific knowledge that we know into a way that farmers are actually able to apply it. So through my involvement with the US Biochar Initiative, last year we put out a couple of practical guides around using biochar within an agricultural setting, both for perennial and annual cropping systems. I put a QR code up here if you are interested in looking at these. They're both 6-page publications that are very easily digestible. And we've also been able to work with the Latin American Institute for Biochar Research and translate it to Spanish as well to disseminate it beyond just English speakers. And one of the ways we approached creating these fact sheets and providing practical information to growers is by taking a similar approach to principles that farmers are very familiar with or have heard about before. For example, the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship. Most farmers understand this and have been able to utilize this to some degree, or these principles on their farm because of the fertilizer industry. And the idea is really thinking about biochar as the right source. What should it be produced from? A woody biomass, a manure, something else. The right rate. What are the application rates that a farmer should be thinking about? Can we utilize it to replace ag lime in some settings or not? The right place. What does this look like in perennial versus annual cropping systems? And the right time. When do we apply this? Pre-plant? Can we top dress it? These are some of the practical questions that I've received over many years working with farmers. And so creating a document that answers these even as a high level has really started to break down barriers to adoption. And I just wanted to highlight some trials that I'm involved in around biochar that will relate to some of these to farmers adopting biochar use as a technology. And this is something I'm working on in collaboration with Johannes Lehmann and Rebecca Nelson here at Cornell, looking at biochar produced from biosolids as well as pasteurized human urine to see what are the impacts on soil health, as well as gaining some of the social science research through interviews of farmers themselves. And these are replicated trials here in New York, down on Long Island, as well as in Vermont. And we recently received, or I should say the Rich Earth Institute out of Vermont recently was awarded a Foundation for Food and Agriculture grant to further this research and really look at the fundamental questions around PFAS, which are becoming more and more of a hot topic, as many of you are probably aware of. Some other work I'm involved in, which I'm really excited about, that Johannes and I are collaborating with American Farmland Trust, are large-scale demonstration trials across 8 states in the US. And we're leading trials here in New York State that will be looking at some of these larger acreage, higher disturbance cropping systems to see if we can encourage and gather more information about biochar use among our larger scale farmers. I should have mentioned that biochar is being really used widely by more organic growers, smaller growers, more higher value production crops, and less so for field crops and more of our agronomic crops. And largely that's because of the economics, but there are other factors as well. So these are trials that we're kicking off this spring, and we'll be working on for the next 5 years on this work. So now jumping ship from the biochar story to just provide an update about this New York Climate Impacts Assessment in the agricultural chapter, which I worked with my colleague Allison. I don't know, oh, she's over there on the floor. But this was a 2.5-year endeavor, so there was a lot of effort, a lot of people devoted time to producing this assessment. And so just to provide a background, I think many folks are familiar with the ClimAid report, which Dave Wolf was the lead on the ag chapter for that 2011 report. And so this update in the New York Climate Impacts Assessment was to build upon the science that was presented within the ClimAid report and provide an update of the latest climate projections and observations, and really focus on adaptation strategies by farmers across New York State. So there were 12 different assessment regions, and there was a much greater focus on climate equity and justice and underserved farmers within this report. Again, here's a QR code if you haven't seen this report, and if you're working at all within the climate space or are interested in seeing it, the governor officially released it on February 2nd. It has been peer reviewed and will be published in the annuals of the New York Academy of Sciences later this year. I do want to recognize a lot of the people who were immediately involved with this chapter development, obviously myself and Allison, but several of our colleagues here in the department and collaborators with various expertise, and farmers and our partner organizations who provided invaluable expertise and knowledge to the development of this chapter. Like I said, it provided an update of the latest impacts around climate change. Some of these, in a similar graph I already mentioned for the continent of Africa, but around that we're seeing changes in temperature. Things are getting hotter across the entire state of New York. It is getting hotter, and to the degree, the extent of this warming will vary depending upon the region. And also when it comes to precipitation, it is changing as well. Fortunately for us in New York State, we will have water as a resource moving forward, but obviously the variability around this precipitation is an issue, especially within farming. Also, our plant hardiness zones are really shifting northward. We're seeing profound impacts of the aquaculture industry and the maple industry, for example. As I mentioned, the focus of this assessment was really on adaptation strategies by sector. And so if you look at the assessment, you'll be able to see a lot of these strategies that we discuss. The last thing I want to mention, if you're working or interested in a particular region of the state, there is information available by these 12 assessment regions, and there are 2-page fact sheets that can be handed out at field days and other events to speak with folks about climate change. So I just want to wrap up here, and I think I'm getting close to time. Yep, with kind of how this all fits together and where I see some of my work in going forward. And this really connects to converting organic waste and resources on farms already here in New York to really expand carbon and soil health opportunities across different types of farming systems. I'm really interested within perennial fruit systems, but more of this idea of circularity of places in New York and across the country. We have a lot of excess of organic material and nutrients. And those are often, and then we have places that are often depleted of nutrients, right? So how can we utilize and link up those places where we have excess and places where we don't? So for example, here, if we have farms that have a lot of wood chips, are there opportunities to process that organic material through a process like pyrolysis and apply it back to farms or other green spaces? Obviously, there are a lot of economic, logistical, and other challenges within this thinking, but it's an idea of taking a more systems and circularity approach to carbon and nutrient management within agriculture in New York State. Continuing with the biochar work, and there are a lot of co-benefits for climate adaptation and mitigation, and thinking about building organic matter in cropping systems where people might not think they need to be thinking about soil health. So applied research and extension is needed to further assist farmers in improving soil health and increasing farms' resiliency to the impacts of climate change. There are still many opportunities to expand efforts within perennial fruit systems and within this idea of bionutrient cycling. So thank you all for listening, and thank you. There's so many people I would thank in my years of research and work in extension. Obviously, my current research group, a lot of the farmers I get to work with, other extension educators around the space, other female scientists that I've been able to meet and really learn from. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. I think we do have a few minutes. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
So I have a question about ISU book. Yeah, actually, I also come from ISU.
Yay, cyclones.
So when you talk about the acting,
Yeah.
The biochar affect the soil and so those results come from the modeling simulation or is from the observation?
So the results I presented, so I think hopefully everyone could hear it, but the question was about the AppSim work within the modeling work. Were they collected data or were they from the simulations? So all the figures I showed, those were modeling simulations. And so as far as I'm aware to date, the AppSim cropping systems model is the only model that can simulate the effects of biochar applications. There's no other cropping model that I'm aware of that has a biochar platform built within it. So it was created in 2016 by some Iowa State University researchers. And so those were long-term modelings we did based on actually ground truthing them. So I did collect deep cores. As a graduate student in soil science, you have to collect cores, right? At some point in your career. I think everyone's experienced that. So I did collect soil samples across the entire state of Iowa in various regions, and I used those to then calibrate the model before I ran the simulations.
So I'm going to ask you the observation to calibrate your model.
Yeah, yep. I have a lot of data I could share, and it's available in the publication for that work as well. Yeah.
Another small question. So about you children asked about adding the wood chips to the orchard, so it kind of prevent the growth of the weeds. So could you explain a little bit about the mechanism why we and the orchard prevent the weed growth?
So how can wood chips prevent weed growth
Yeah.
there? Yeah, so well, so a lot of orchard growers want to keep a weed-free strip there, because weeds, especially for young trees, can compete with the productivity of those trees. And so they'll spray an herbicide. And so applying wood chips is a way to cut back on the herbicide use. So effectively not allowing light to reach the soil surface, keeping it covered, so they have to get through some type of physical barrier, and they're unable to germinate. Is at least one way. But a lot of growers are hesitant or have previously been hesitant to apply wood chips because they have rodents in orchards, and so this can be a habitat for voles and other rodents, and the rodents will bite at the trees and they'll kill the trees. And so when you put basically a nice shelter for them, this can be an issue. But research that Greg Peck did here in Ithaca and I did down on Long Island, at least over several years, that if you use large wood chips, so large wood chips, not like a fine sawdust, there's no increased evidence of vole or rodent damage on trees. And you help improve the weed suppression, soil moisture, and there were no negative benefits of doing this practice in the orchard. And actually, on this farm down on Long Island that I had the trial, the grower then wanted to expand wood chips across the orchard because he was seeing the benefits from there. Yeah, go ahead.
Very expensive impacted work. Thank you. So you mentioned that the yield on the point should no different after biochar application. My question is, how do you think about the initial recent policies, the action management changed for all the biochar treatment, and there is the yield data protected at the same year of the biochar application? Is that caused by like the unbalanced carbon to nitrogen ratio caused by the biochar application, or is that because like there is actually soil legacy effect that will beneficial to the corn yield, but it takes time to show that?
A lot of questions in there, and I could spend another entire hour just talking about biochar, because that's often what I do. But to keep it brief, and I'm happy to speak further with you. But when we think about biochar applications, just like any amendment or fertilizer applications, we have to be thinking about why we're applying it, right? And typically the impacts on corn and crop yields within temperate environments have been lower than within tropical environments. So where we have issues with organic matter depletion or sandier soils or low cation exchange capacity, this is typically where we see a more positive response on yield through biochar applications, because it's somehow addressing a resource concern like soil pH or water retention, nutrient availability, or something like that. So within that modeling work, the idea is that there were no negative effects of biochar application, but not necessarily we didn't see positive impacts on corn yield as well through biochar application. So there's a lot of other co-benefits provided by biochar within temperate systems that might not necessarily be associated with actually a yield benefit, which is often what the grower cares about from an economic. So if they're applying some type of amendment, they want to know, am I going to get an improvement in yield? Because at the end of the day, that's the money for them. So if they're investing in something and not getting a return on that investment, why would I apply it? So that was just one study and the simulations saying there was no negative effects on corn yield. And we can talk further about some more specifics. David.
Debbie, it's very interesting. Has there been any study on the Long Island case of soil health parameters linked with this water quality issues? In the Netherlands, there's quite a bit of work on this. Similarly, a lot of sandy soils, because it seems to me that one of the biggest benefits may not be to the farmer, it may be to the water quality that you don't have to clean up. And I'm just wondering, has that been looked at?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of initiatives down on Long Island around pesticide pollution prevention, nitrogen leaching reduction, and some work on the soil side, but probably not to the extent like in the Netherlands.
But specifically, I was thinking of these soil health parameters. You're picking which ones seem to be associated, let's say, with yield.
Yeah.
Maybe the study should be which ones are most associated with improvement of water quality. I'm just wondering if that kind of research has been done with the soil health parameters as the predictors.
With those parameters specifically, no, not that I know of.
I think that would be some evidence that these soil health parameters really mean something.
Yeah. Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we're at time, but you can, oh, Janet.
Go ahead,
Curiosity question. Thank you for this. It's really nice to know where you've been, what you've done, the interest you have. It's really fascinating. On your water hyacinth work,
Yeah.
that's my curiosity question. It's almost 90% water. So
Yeah.
how did it actually work out in terms of trying to make biodiversity?
That's a really great question. I mean, my motivation there was because it's an invasive species, right?
And
And
look at the Wyndham Gulf. I mean,
yeah,
Yeah.
and people are looking for ways to transform it and actually have a benefit around it. So it's a really sustainable feedstock. Water percentage, obviously an issue. It's the same with a lot of the work that's happening here in New York around like dairy manure biochar. How do you get rid of the water in some type of drying process before you actually pyrolyze it? It was the same issue with water hyacinths. I had to do a lot of pre-drying of the material. And so you can get a room full of water hyacinth this much, and it might end up like a small amount in this corner, right? And so there was a lot of pre-drying that had to occur before pyrolyzing it. And that could be a logistic issue at a much larger scale beyond just my master's research. Thank you, everyone.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.